Throughout history, wealthy people have had two favorite pastimes. One is taking the saw to the branch they're sitting on, the other, detaching themselves from the rabble, even if it means abandoning their stomping grounds and moving away. This is the story of an architectural masterpiece here in New York that took 14 years to build and was demolished 17 years later. And here you thought the demolition of the old Penn Station was an outrage. The station, possibly the most majestic in the world, was completed in 1910 and leveled mercilessly in 1963. I should make a separate video about it. It's quite a story, but I digress. 17 years. It was known as Clark's Folly. It stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 77th Street. It was an impossible building and strangely beautiful. Some of the founding fathers were reasonably wealthy, mostly through land ownership, although some were financiers like Robert Morris. In those days, some of the wealthy folks settled in lower Manhattan, around Bowling Green and the Battery, and also along Broadway as it moved north past Wall Street. In the 1820s, when the area became too busy for their discriminating tastes, the elite relocated to Washington Square North. Some of those elegant townhouses are still standing, which is a blessing. It was close enough to downtown business, but quieter. No plebeians, you know. When that changed, the elite continued their collective journey north, this time to Union Square, which became the place for high society for a couple of decades. You know, the Opera House, playfully named the Academy of Music on Irving Place, that was built, a place where status was displayed. Those famous boxes were practically owned by elite families. Who had a box and who didn't have a box, that was a major social marker. This was, mind you, before the robber barons emerged and began to move in on the elite's turf. When Union Square became too commercial, which is to say filled with loud-mouthed, poorly dressed, littering tatterdemalions who didn't seem to give a rat's ass about high culture, the wealthy migrated further north to Madison Square. Following the Civil War, the place began to rise rapidly. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, this was their time. They were the new money people. Their wealth coming from rapid industrialization like railroads, steel, and oil. Finally, both old money and new began to find the neighborhood too crowded for their discerning taste and hauled ass once more to 5th Avenue, along Central Park. The celebrated Millionaires Row. That's where they really went to town. Yes, the entire length of 5th Avenue from 59th and south of 59th and all the way to the 80s. This was suddenly lined with mansions, taking up entire blocks. Objectively speaking, this was an overkill. Fine, I admit that. Too much. A dozen townhouses would have been reasonable, but not 50 or 60. Come on. Such brazen displays of wealth are rare in history. The proud man's contumely, indeed. But economic and class issues aside, from the purely aesthetic point of view, you could say it was, garish. Yes, but it was also quite beautiful in spots. And it soon proved to be the whole project proved to be unsustainable. 50 palaces, each with who knows how many rooms, and employing a lot of staff, a few dozen people per mansion. This couldn't last very long because the peak of robber baron wealth couldn't last very long. Peaks or bubbles, if you will, normally don't. Fair enough, but that's not the point. What wasn't fair was the fact that when some of the owners went bankrupt, because rapid growth of the same industries cannot be permanent, when they went bankrupt or at least had to rein in their appetites a little bit and couldn't afford the dusting bill anymore, the wave of demolition and new construction that followed was nearly total. Few of the mansions survived. And those that did may not have been the most striking, the most eye-pleasing. What did survive? Well, the Andrew Carnegie Mansion, the James B. Duke House, the William Starr Miller House, Harry F. Sinclair House, Payne Whitney House, Henry Clay Frick House. The Landmark Preservation Commission wasn't there yet. It's well established, entrenched today, but it's not doing a very good job now, is it? Like, what is this Lady Macbeth's needle doing blocking the view of the Empire State Building? Swinging in the wind, 15% occupancy, in the middle of a housing crisis, no less. Hello? The projected budget for the agency this year is $7.9 million. Maybe they need more money. I don't know. Speaking of bribery, who is William A. Clark? Born in Pennsylvania, raised and educated in Iowa, he made his fortune in Montana, in copper mining, smelters, electric power companies, newspapers, railroads, banking, agriculture, timber enterprises. At the age of 30, he enrolled in what now is Columbia University to study metallurgy. His initial dream, though, was to be a statesman. After several attempts involving bribery, a lot of bribery, he did serve a single term as a senator from Montana. This eventually became grounds for the passing of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. Yes, he did bribe a lot of legislators, which means that a lot of legislators were ready and willing to take bribes from him and who knows who else. When criticized for it, his reply was invariably, "I never bought a man who wasn't for sale." Okay, so he did that. He served that one term. The dream was fulfilled. Done. Now what? Well, his next dream was a bit different and a bit harder to fulfill. He wished to become a full-fledged member of New York's high society. Now, back in those days, as today, that particular amusing cream of the crop group consisted of old money people plus, a bit reluctantly perhaps, some newish money people like the industrialists, like there was the Astor, old Knickerbocker crowd, the true old money folks, and then there were the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, and so on, grudgingly accepted, validated by the circle. And then there was Clark, with his Western mining wealth, dirty, Montana politics, backwoods, spectacular Senate bribery scandal, reprehensible, and a reputation for blunt acquisition rather than cultivated refinement. He was a provincial. He was not refined. He was crass. His manners left much to be desired. He was embarrassing. So he was not welcome. He was looked down on. He was a social pariah.
Did you say you're from Montana?
Yes, ma'am.
How delightful.
So, am I invited?
The guest list is full right now, I'm afraid.
Come on, what's one more plate?
Now, don't be tiresome, Mr. Clark. Some other time, perhaps.
It also makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, you've got all the money in the world, you have a business that you love, or you could just retire and enjoy yourself. It's up to you. You can have all the luxuries you desire. Or you could give it all away to churches and charities. And yet, ambition is a terrible thing, isn't it? He had to show them, all those hateful New York snobs, yeah. He was going to stick it to them, those champions of aristocratic purity, the evil slime. How? He would build a house in the most prestigious area for himself, his wife, and his daughter. Do you have a house in the most prestigious area? You might want to consider building one. It was going to be the best house ever. Not a mansion, a palace. And that's what Clark proceeded to do. He hired a firm run by two architects, Austin W. Lord and James Monroe Hewlett. They were capable fellows. They put together some drafts. Clark asked for a few modifications. The blueprints followed and construction commenced. and went on for 14 years. Clark purchased a quarry up in New Hampshire to extract high-quality, premium-type pink granite for the place. He built a railroad spur connecting the quarry to the main railway running to the freight terminal in New Jersey, from which the train cars loaded with granite were transferred to specially made barges, car floats. These car floats would then travel across the Hudson to Manhattan, where the granite would be unloaded on trucks and further transported to Fifth Avenue, corner of 77th Street. Clark then built another railway spur, an underground one, that delivered coal to his house. Why? Because his house featured its own power plant. A single private residence in Manhattan had its own power plant. I'm not criticizing. On the contrary, you gotta admire the guy. I mean, forget yachts and private jets and all those tacky disposable toys. You don't want to be called a Philistine, do you? No, of course not. Your house has its own power plant, and the house is in Manhattan. Wow. The place featured 121 rooms and 31 bathrooms, a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a huge library, a picture gallery featuring old European masters. American art was at its peak at that time, with Sargent, Chase, Sloane, etc. producing their best works. But Upper East Side snobbery prohibited society members and wannabes from purchasing their work. Occasionally they'd commission a portrait or two, but generally American painters were perceived as local craftsmen. In the minds of society, Europe, which is to say France, maybe Italy, and to a lesser degree England, was the land where high culture resided. America was far behind, yes. That particular inferiority complex was still running strong in those days. And yes, of course, the English and the French looked down on the people they perceived as backwoods parvenus. Listen, I feel perfectly comfortable criticizing, triumphantly incompetent architects, pompous scientists who worship the paradigm and spend 95% of their time composing grand requests, pretentious, discordant composers treating their audiences as if they were a bunch of boobs with low self-esteem, politicians whose goal is to get out of touch with their constituencies the moment they're elected, historians propping up destructive ideologies instead of engaging in any meaningful research. No problem. But I do shy away from judging or even just assessing, at least publicly, writers and painters. I'm a writer and a painter, and criticizing one's colleagues, albeit highly tempting, is, in my opinion, bad form. In other words, poor taste. In this case, however, allow me to point out, shh, don't let it get around. Yes, those old money hotshots and wannabes were completely wrong. They trusted critics and dealers, and they shouldn't have. You see, certain American painters were far superior to what Europe had to offer in those days. Yes, I admire Lautrec as much as the next person, but French Impressionism was done, while American Realistic Impressionism or Impressionistic Realism, call it what you will, that was on the rise. An unprecedented movement, with masterpieces galore. Whistler, who by the way had inspired French Impressionists, Sargent, one of the greatest painters ever, Sloane, Thomas Anschutz, those were quite something. I just have to say it. Anyway, back to Clark's Folly. The staff consisted of about 50 people. Apart from the chef, waiters, cleaning ladies, and the butler, there were also a couple of footmen, a sommelier, an art expert, the curator of the gallery, three engineers working around the clock, and who knows what other crew. And yes, the house was dubbed Clark's Folly by those who, well, envied Clark. Jealousy, the green-eyed monster, also one of the seven cardinal sins. Was the house garish? In a manner of speaking, yes. Was it in poor taste? Well, not really, no. It could have been, but the architects were too talented, I guess. Talent can overcome poor taste, sometimes. Be that as it may, the dinner parties were lavish, and really, really, friends, the place was, well, stunning. I'm no great fan of interior designs. I'm an artist specializing in cityscapes, and I prefer painting on plein air, outdoors. But even I must admit, yes, I am kind of impressed by all that decor from what I can glean from old photographs. Glory days, the peak of the Gilded Age. Ironically, Mark Twain, who coined the term, absolutely hated Clark. The quote runs, "He is as rotten a human being as can be found anywhere under the flag." Clark did not seem to mind. And then disaster struck, architectural disaster. Clark died at the age of 86. His widow and daughter couldn't afford a dusting bill. They moved to a luxury apartment in a newly built high-rise and sold the property to a developer. One by one, the mansions along Central Park, Fifth Avenue along Central Park, all of them were coming down, being replaced by nondescript high-rises. It was more than just a question of sustainability. Whatever you and I may think of robber barons, yes, they were assholes. Some of them were perfectly evil, there's no denying that. But they also worked their asses off, and they poured their heart's blood into their work. Yes, they squeezed and oppressed people and screwed over others, but that too takes a toll on a man's spirit. They invested all their time and energy into their projects. And those mansions, they expected them to be their long-lasting legacies for centuries to come. So what happened? Well, their kids and grandkids, most of whom did not have to work at all, never had to break a sweat, had sinecures, sitting on meaningless boards and attending those comical charity balls. They weren't impressed. Some were ashamed of their parents and grandparents and of their own inherited wealth, although never to the point of giving it all away to charities and churches. They were, in modern terms, parlor room, virtue signaling pseudo-Marxists. Many of them felt that the time for private mansions in Manhattan was over, done and gone. They favored instead luxury apartments and fast cars. They thought cars were stylish, chic. And yes, they agreed that Park Avenue, which was a true boulevard, with a walkable mall in the middle, with the trees and the benches, like today's Boulevard Clichy in Paris, they thought it was passé. The median needed to be converted into a narrow lawn, and the resulting free space on either side be turned into extra lanes for gratuitous car traffic. They loved their fancy cars, and so the developer demolished Clark's Folly. The idea was to build something more profitable in its place, and so he did. He built this, a reasonably faceless building with so-called luxury apartments. He made a profit, all right. This was in the year of our Lord 1927, before the onset of the Great Depression. Back then, architects still had to, at least pay architectural lip service to the canon. Hence the few balustered decorative balconies and mascarons pasted onto the otherwise perfectly flat facade. This developer, an Italian immigrant, when he was in the process of demolishing the house, was he concerned about, culture, architecture, American history, his own Italian background? Probably not. But Can we blame him? He was just an entrepreneur. He saw an opportunity and he took advantage of it. He is not the villain in this story. With a few modifications, Clark's Folly would have been a highly profitable tourist attraction today. Or it could have been repurposed. A non-profit could have taken over, or it could have been a museum or a consulate. Did anyone try to stop the developer? Save the architectural masterpiece? Not the mayor's administration, not the state government, not the federal government. They weren't concerned about the preservation of cultural treasures, and with what's going on in the city today, one would suspect they still aren't. Look, most people out there, most people you and I know, probably could not afford to live in Clark's Folly, nor in the ludicrous file cabinet that replaced it. But the space around it is public space. And most people, wealthy or otherwise, when they have some free time and decide to take a stroll along Fifth, would rather have eye candy to look at than this nauseating early day slab. Property rights are a fine thing until they become an assault on the senses. You can design your interiors however you like. Be as tasteless as you please behind the lobby doors. But the facade, that belongs to the street. It belongs to every person trying to find a bit of grace in this city. We shouldn't be forced to endure architectural malpractice just because it was the most profitable use of the lot. If there isn't a law against shoving these nightmarish slabs into our collective vision, perhaps there should be. Thank you for watching. I'm Ricky Vernio coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I'll see you soon.